In the summer of 1870, Europe stood at a crossroads. The great powers of the continent had fought for centuries. Alliances formed, empires collapsed, and new nations were born from the ashes of old. But this war would be different. The Franco-Prussian War was more than just a clash of armies. It was a conflict that shattered one empire, forged another, and changed the very balance of power in Europe. This is the story of pride and ambition, of empires at their peak and on the brink of collapse. A story that begins not on the battlefield, but in the world of diplomacy, politics, and one carefully crafted telegram that lit the match. France, under Napoleon III, believed itself to be the master of Europe. For decades, Paris had been the beating heart of continental power. Its culture, its fashion, its armies admired and feared. But across the Rhine, a new power was rising. Prussia, led by the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, had unified the German states through war and diplomacy. With each victory, the dream of a German empire grew stronger, and France grew more uneasy. In 1870, the spark came from Spain. A vacant throne, a proposed Prussian candidate, and a French demand for humiliation. What should have been a minor diplomatic quarrel became a crisis of pride. When Bismarck released the infamous Ems Dispatch, edited to insult the French, the public in Paris erupted with fury. On July 19, 1870, France declared war on Prussia. Neither side realized it, but this war would not just decide the future of their nations. It would redraw the map of Europe for generations to come. To understand why France and Prussia went to war, we must step into the turbulent politics of 19th century Europe. For centuries, France had been the great power on the continent. From the days of Louis XIV to Napoleon Bonaparte, it had shaped the destiny of nations. But by 1870, that supremacy was slipping. Napoleon III, nephew of the great conqueror, ruled France with ambition, but also insecurity. His empire was glittering on the outside, but fragile within. A booming Paris masked economic strain, political unrest, and a growing sense that France's glory days were fading. Across the Rhine, a very different story was unfolding. Under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, Prussia had risen from obscurity to dominance. Through carefully crafted wars, the Danish War of 1864, the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, Bismarck had isolated rivals and united much of Germany under Prussian leadership. France watched these victories with alarm. The rise of a united Germany would mean the end of French dominance in Europe. Napoleon III knew it. Bismarck knew it. War, sooner or later, seemed inevitable. The spark came in 1870. A vacant Spanish throne, offered to a Prussian prince, threatened to surround France with enemies. Paris demanded assurances, but Bismarck saw opportunity. By editing the now famous Ems Dispatch, a simple telegram, he turned a diplomatic quarrel into an insult. The French press cried out for war. The streets of Paris filled with chants for honor and revenge. On July 19, 1870, France declared war on Prussia. The trap was sprung, and Napoleon III had walked straight into it. France marched into the war with confidence. Its armies were thought to be the finest in Europe, veterans of colonial campaigns, dressed in striking uniforms of red and blue, their reputation built on centuries of victory. But behind the glitter lay weakness. The French army was poorly organized, its logistics outdated, and its leadership divided. Napoleon III himself, old and in failing health, insisted on taking command, though he was unfit for the task. The Prussians, on the other hand, had been preparing for this very moment. Their army was disciplined, modern, and efficiently organized. They had the Krupp steel cannon, superior artillery that could outmatch anything France brought to the field. More importantly, they had a plan. Helmuth von Moltke, chief of the Prussian General Staff, had mapped out every move. Using railways, he concentrated forces with astonishing speed, delivering soldiers and supplies right where they were needed. When war began, the French invaded German territory, but hesitated. Their mobilization was slow and confused. Supplies ran short, morale began to waver, and the initiative slipped away. The Germans seized their chance. In early August 1870, they launched a counteroffensive. The borderlands of Alsace and Lorraine would become the first battlegrounds of this war. And in those fields, France would face the shocking reality of its decline. On August 4th, at Wissembourg, the French suffered their first defeat. Overwhelmed by superior numbers, they were forced back. 2 days later came the battle. The French fought bravely, but their cavalry charges, once the pride of France, were torn apart by German artillery and rifle fire. Thousands lay dead. The mighty French army was in retreat. At Spicheren on August 6th, the story was the same. Poor communication, confused leadership, and aggressive German attacks shattered the French defenses. By mid-August, the French high command was in chaos. Napoleon III, suffering from illness, could barely ride with his troops. His generals quarreled. Armies that were supposed to unite instead scattered. Then came Mars-la-Tour on August 16th. Here, the French had a chance to break free, to retreat west and regroup. But hesitation cost them dearly. A bold German cavalry charge, the famous death ride of Mars-la-Tour, sacrificed thousands, but delayed the French just long enough. The opportunity was lost. The French were trapped. And with every passing day, the noose tightened. By late August 1870, the French armies were broken, scattered, and desperate. The main French force, under Marshal MacMahon, was retreating north in hopes of linking with reinforcements. But Moltke and the Prussians were moving faster. On August 30th, the French were caught at Beaumont and pushed back toward the fortress town of Sedan, near the Belgian border. It was here that fate would decide the war. Sedan was supposed to be a safe haven. Its fortress walls and rugged terrain promised protection. But instead, it became a trap. The Prussians encircled the town, cutting off escape. At dawn on September 1st, 1870, the Battle of Sedan began. German artillery thundered from the surrounding hills, raining fire upon the French positions. Entire units were shredded before they could even fight back. MacMahon was wounded early in the battle. Leadership passed from one confused general to another. French soldiers tried to break out, but every attempt was beaten back. Cavalry charged again and again into withering fire. Thousands fell in moments. By afternoon, chaos ruled the French army. Whole regiments surrendered, others fled in panic. Civilians inside, Sedan watched in horror as the fields outside were choked with smoke, flame, and the dead. And then came the unthinkable. Napoleon III himself, trapped in a town, ordered a white flag raised. The French emperor, nephew of Napoleon the Great, had surrendered with his entire army, over 100,000 men captured in a single day. Across Europe, shockwaves rippled. In Paris, crowds rioted at the news. The Second French Empire crumbled overnight. Napoleon III was finished. And out of the ashes, a new government was proclaimed, the French Third Republic. But the war was not over. In fact, for France, the darkest days were still ahead. After Sedan, the road to Paris lay open. The Prussians marched relentlessly, their armies tightening the noose around the French capital. On September 19, 1870, the siege of Paris began. The city of light, the jewel of Europe, was cut off from the world. Railways severed, telegraph lines destroyed. No food, no reinforcements, no escape. Inside Paris, 2 million people faced starvation. Horses, dogs, even rats became meals. Balloons floated out of the city, carrying desperate messages over enemy lines. But the Parisians refused to surrender. The new Republican government rallied the people with cries of La Patrie in danger, the homeland in danger. National Guardsmen, students, and volunteers filled the ranks. From the walls of the city, they fought back with whatever they had. But Moltke was patient. He did not storm Paris, he starved it. Winter set in. Hunger gnawed at the population. The once glorious capital descended into despair. Yet still they held on. Still, they dreamed of a relief army breaking, but no army came. French forces outside Paris were defeated one by one. By January 1871, hope had faded. The people of Paris, starving and exhausted, had no choice. On January 28th, after more than 4 months, Paris surrendered. The war for France was lost. Though Paris had fallen, France itself did not surrender quietly. The collapse of Napoleon III had given birth to the government of national defense, which called upon the French people to resist at all costs. Across the countryside, small groups of fighters, franc-tireurs, or free shooters waged guerrilla war. Railways were sabotaged, German patrols ambushed, supply lines cut. These irregular fighters became symbols of French defiance, but also drew brutal reprisals. Entire villages were burned in retaliation. Meanwhile, new French armies were raised in the provinces, raw recruits, poorly trained, hastily equipped. They marched bravely, but against the battle-hardened Prussians, they stood little chance. At battles like Loigny, Le Mans, and Belfort, the French fought with courage, but the outcome was inevitable. Exhausted, starving, and divided, the nation bled itself dry in a hopeless struggle. The government of national defense finally admitted the truth. The war could not be won. And so, they turned to the painful task of negotiation. In January 1871, an armistice was signed. France and Prussia sat down to make peace, but the terms were harsh. The Treaty of Frankfurt, signed on May 10, 1871, demanded staggering concessions. France was forced to pay an indemnity of 5 billion francs, a crushing sum at the time. Worse still, Germany annexed the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, tearing them from France and planting a seed of hatred that would grow for generations. For the French, it was humiliation beyond measure. For the Germans, it was triumph. And in a final twist of fate, while Paris still lay under siege, the German princes gathered at Versailles, in the Hall of Mirrors. There, on January 18, 1871, Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German emperor. The dream of German unification had been achieved, on French soil, in a palace that symbolized French glory. It was a calculated insult, one that France would never forget. But France's agony did not end with peace. As the German army withdrew, Paris erupted in rebellion. Workers, National Guardsmen, and radicals seized control of the city, declaring a revolutionary government, the Paris Commune. For 2 bloody months in 1871, Paris became a battleground once more, this time Frenchmen against Frenchmen. The Commune dreamed of social equality, of a people's republic. But the national government, now based in Versailles, could not allow it. Civil war followed. In what became known as the Bloody Week, government troops stormed Paris street by street. Barricades were torn down, communards executed in droves. Tens of thousands were killed or imprisoned. The Franco-Prussian War had ended, but France was left shattered, militarily defeated, politically divided, socially scarred. The Franco-Prussian War changed the course of history. For Germany, it was a birth of power. A new empire, united and triumphant, stood at the heart of Europe. Its industries boomed, its armies admired, its ambitions awakened. For France, it was humiliation and loss, but also determination. The cry of revanche, revenge, echoed for decades. Every French child was taught of Alsace and Lorraine, stolen by the Germans. And so, the seeds were sown for the rivalries of the 20th century. World War I, and even World War II could trace their roots back to the events of 1870 to 71. The Franco-Prussian War lasted just 6 months, but its legacy endured for generations, shaping nations, fueling hatred, and redrawing the map of Europe. It was not just a war between France and Prussia. It was the birth of modern Europe,